Welcome to Behind the Music, the Houston Chamber Choir's weekly podcast. I'm St. John Flynn. Joining me this time on Behind the Music is Rameen Chaharbaghi, who sings bass in the Houston Chamber Choir. Rameen, thank you very much for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here, St. John.
So, you've been in the bass section for how long? When did you join the choir?
If my memory serves me correctly, I joined in 2016, so this is my 5th season.
And how's it been so far?
I've really loved it. As I say a lot to Bob Simpson and the other members, it's really fun for me to be in an ensemble that performs a wide variety of music. I'm not a one composer kind of guy. I'm not a one period kind of guy. I'm the kind of person who is happy to be in the type of season where you're singing the B minor mass one concert and the next concert you're singing, 1950s and 60s pop music. I think variety is the spice of life. And it's also rewarding to be in an ensemble where your goal is to always produce that any kind of music at the highest standard possible, not just to provide, like the Bennigan sampler platter, but really to put quality to it, because I think that all music is worthy of that quality, even if it's, whether it's Mozart or Dolly Parton.
In the 5 years that you've been part of the choir, are there particular performances or particular pieces that really stand out in your mind?
Definitely the Duraflay concert we did of his complete choral works, which would go on, of course, to win us the Grammy for Best Choral Performance for that recording,
Yeah.
which was so rewarding. Thank you. It was such a, what's that emoji with the brain explosion? I had that before me now. I don't know if our production team can work some kind of magic there, but anyway, that one is up there for me. I got the incredible opportunity to also sing a solo at that concert. And, the acoustics at the Rice Organ Hall were just unparalleled. The Bach B minor mass concert, where I also got to perform as a soloist, was a big one for me, just because that's always been a dream solo of mine to perform, and it's one of my favorite pieces of choral music. And I know it's not necessarily like the first thing you think of when you think of choral geeks, but I love the Pops concerts in outdoor. I absolutely live for them. Just to be able to feed off of the audience's energy and the way that people react when we're just rehearsing, and they're just out there enjoying their picnic and we weren't expecting anything. It's so much fun to see the kids start to dance along. I really loved our performance of Minotti's The Gorgon, the Unicorn, and the Manticore. It was amazing to get to collaborate with dancers. I'm all about collaborations, and particularly unusual collaborations. It's not every day that a choir collaborates with dancers. And I think really for me, every single Christmas performance at the Villa has been memorable for me, because that space is just so stunningly beautiful.
Yes, it really is.
Even though my family doesn't really religiously observe Christmas, it's still a magical part of the time of the year. And there were some years when we would even still put up Christmas decorations anyway, just to get the feeling. So yeah, those are probably my memorable performances now that I've listed, almost half of the total shows I've ever been in with chamber choir. But there you go.
How have you changed as a singer in the time that you've been with the choir? What has it taught you about yourself as a singer?
I would say the first and most important lesson I've learned with the chamber choir is flexibility. My master's degree, which I got from UH, emphasized more soloistic performance. And in the chamber choir, you really need to be able to emerge and then draw back, to bring your voice out and come back in. It taught me that. It's taught me, my sight reading has come light years thanks to being a part of the chamber choir. But to really have a shrewd ear, I think that some of the things we sometimes prize the most in choral singers, soloists, sometimes, not all soloists, but some soloists sort of, you know, don't really view as being terribly important. But I feel that anything that makes you a better musician serves you. I've also I've learned how rewarding that can be too. I remember my first first rehearsal. There was just a moment within the first 30 minutes where the choir like really came together, and it felt like being in one of those tunnels of light but sound instead. And to both be part of it and be within it was just surreal. It was one of those wow moments.
And what's Bob like as a conductor? That's an unfair question, I know, but you know, people always talk about, you know, how inspired he is as a conductor. What is it that you think makes him so inspiring, if you like?
I think he is the perfect example of a conductor who holds you to a high standard because he knows what you're capable of. And I value that because I never want to feel like I'm not growing or being challenged. Even if it means that maybe getting that one note right is becoming a frustrating process, I would much rather that than to feel as though, oh, we're just going to sort of give up on it. It's not really happening. That's okay. To me, that's not the essence of professionalism. And Bob has just an incredible ear that, again, has taught me a lot. And I also don't think he's ever unfair. I think he's always right, but also I think the things he's after, once you key into them, you realize, oh yeah, that was important, that was necessary. And it's one of the things that I value most about being in the chamber choir is being challenged and really feeling like if we're going to go for this, we're going to go for it. You know, we're not going to pretend anything. But at the same time, it's been really wonderful to work with him through the pandemic too, and to see how sometimes my own perfectionist tendencies can be my worst enemy. And in fact, if we are so driven for that perfect standard and for that growth and for being challenged that we can't find a way to do it artistically or expressively, then there's not really any point. One of the many things I value about him is his emphasis on text stress and on the text meaning. Many choir directors will focus on things like intonation and phrase shaping, which are important, but to the exclusion of the text. And to me, yes, I've heard some singers say things like, oh, the words don't matter as much as the music, and I disagree, because words are a singer's weapon, for lack of a better word. We're the only instrument that gets words and consonants. And there are things that you can do with words that no other instrument can do, and we shouldn't throw that away.
So what's it been like for you as a singer to live through this pandemic?
It's not been easy. I'm from Maryland originally, which means that most of my friends in the Houston area are other singers and other musicians. And to see what they've been going through and what I myself have been going through has been a real struggle. It has forced me, and I think this is good, it has forced me to find other interests and to sort of round myself out more in things besides music. But the ways it's impacted my friends who I know really need that outlet. I like having that outlet, but I have other things to sustain me as well. But I know people who, have just been devastated by it. And I'm grateful that through things like Opera on Tap, for instance, we have been able to continue to do virtual shows. So we still have that outlet. But it's, as we can all attest, it's just not the same. And I think one of the most special things about what we do in the chamber choir is live performance. I think that there's no substitute for that. Virtual
Right.
is nice. And it's it's so admirable to me to see all these groups trying to keep it going with virtual, including chamber choir. I think that's really a testament to their passion and commitment and our passion and commitment, I should say, uh, to delivering fine art. But it's as we all know, it can never be the same.
I think one of the things that talking to other members of the choir and other people associated with the choir is that the pandemic has really driven home the fact that the choir it's a family, isn't it? And it engenders a great sense of community, and that is something that I think a lot of you are really missing.
Yeah. I mean, whenever we have breaks in the rehearsal process, we always have water cooler time, right? Where everybody just sort of gathers around and talks. But I've noticed it happens more now. At my old school, it was funny. There was a moment after the dismissal, the car rider line was the last parent had picked up their child, and the vice principal pointed out, she was next to me while I was talking to some other teachers, and she pointed out, dismissal's been over for 10 minutes, and look around. All the teachers are still here talking to each other. They could have left 10 minutes ago, but they are so starved for adult social interaction.
Right.
They're still here.
You mentioned teaching, and I know up until fairly recently, you were teaching in an elementary school. Were you teaching music?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I was that school's first full-time elementary music teacher.
And what was that like for you?
I loved it. Teaching, of course, is not easy. Everybody knows that. And I certainly had my dark days, especially during the pandemic. But
Right.
it was incredibly rewarding. And I'm terribly sad to have left my students for safety concerns, but I miss it dreadfully. And it was my favorite part of it is the ability that music has to provide joy in a child's life like no other subject can, because
Right.
even the other special subjects, music is just different. It's just different. I think one of the best things about it is you don't really need anything expensive or material or fancy to enjoy music. You don't even need something to play the music on. If you know the song, there's a song called Doggy Doggy. I'm sure most elementary music teachers are nodding their head when I say that name. And you don't need anything for it other than just any mundane object. It could be a pebble. And all you need to know is the song, have that pebble, a few other kids, you're good to go. That's what I enjoyed the most about my job. I know a lot of music educators who really want to conduct the dream choir, right? The children's choir and what have you, to get all ones at UIL or whatever the big prize is. I want to conduct children's choir. I enjoy doing that, but that's really not what I enjoy the most about it. I am a general music teacher at heart, through and through. I like finding means of exposing children to all kinds of music. I love all types of music. Being in a multicultural household, I was exposed to a lot of different styles. And I want to instill that passion and love for music in other kids.
You mentioned growing up in a multicultural household. Tell us about that household. You grew up in Maryland, didn't you?
My father is originally from Iran, and my mother is from Baltimore, Maryland. And they met actually around the Persian hostage crisis, a little bit before then.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And
that was 1979. Is that correct?
Yeah, a few years before then, but yes. Okay. And then their relationship blossomed through that. And they both are very passionate about music, although neither was a musician exactly growing up. I mean, both sang, communally, but unlike some of my peers, I didn't grow up with music teacher parents, for example. But what I did grow up with was parents who were extremely passionate about the music they loved and wanted their kid to be passionate too. It was everything from my father singing old school Iranian music and playing it on the radio and on old cassette tapes, to my mom dancing along to the Beatles with me when I was little, and singing in the car together to Motown. And the influences from the two different cultures were pretty unique. My father, when I was growing up anyway, was a pretty devout Muslim. I grew up around a lot of Muslim worship and those religious practices. However, my parents were adamant not to force either religion on me. I was not baptized. I was not forced to go to any mosque services. I chose to do either or both sometimes, but I cherish my multicultural upbringing a lot. It primed me, first of all, to be pretty good with language, which is really important as a singer. My father didn't teach me Farsi, but I speak a little bit of it. Yekam Farsi Baladam, and he certainly spoke it around me. We were at quite a few Iranian celebrations where it was really the only language spoken in some of those gatherings. And I've been to Iran 3 times in my life. And it's a beautiful country. The people are incredibly hospitable, and the architecture is just, I mean, I could salivate over it.
Well, you are doing,
yeah, a little bit.
Do you write Farsi? Can you write any Farsi?
I can write my own name in Farsi, and that's about it, Sinjin. Farsi is a very difficult language to learn to read and write. They don't print every vowel per se. So there are many cases where in order to read a word, you just need to know the word already.
Right.
And sort of fill it in. My father and mother did try to take me to Farsi school when I was young at a local mosque, but I don't know if all Farsi schools are like this, but their homework load was crazy. I mean, for a first grader, it was like 30-page packets a week. On top of my normal schoolwork, and it became unfeasible after a while. But I would still love to learn Farsi, and I'm getting there.
Because with Farsi, you write from right to left.
Correct.
Is that correct? Yeah. Now, does your mother speak Farsi?
Nope. She speaks it far worse than I do, as a matter of fact.
Oh, well.
A lot of the Farsi I know, it's funny, I actually learned when I lived with my Iranian uncle in Denmark, because he is, he's a diplomat, which is why he's lived all over the world. And I lived there with his family for 3 months one summer. I learned a lot of Farsi then. I picked it up sort of while I was in Iran too. But of course, there's not really any substitute for formal training. You know, as an example, I do speak some Spanish, and I've been complimented on my Spanish sometimes, and I tell people, ironically, I'm not Latina or anything. I just took 4 years of it in high school, and I had a really, really amazing teacher. And I live in Texas, so I have plenty of opportunity to practice.
And obviously, for a choral singer, somebody who has a formal vocal education, languages are so important.
I think that one of the most important aspects of learning language that people overlook is learning the syntax of a language. Because you can learn all the vocabulary you want, but ultimately you will forget some of the vocabulary because there's a lot of vocabulary. But understanding the syntax of, for instance, the way that a Farsi sentence is structured, that allows you to decode text in a much more universal fashion than having your pocketbook dictionary or saying that you did Duolingo.
So how did you come to study music at university?
Well, in high school, I joined a choir, and before that, I had been into musical theater and thinking that that was the route that I wanted to take. My first ever musical I was in was You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown in middle school, and I was Charlie Brown. And I had a lot of fun, and I thought that was the route I wanted to take. My parents, thankfully, convinced me to get a music education degree. They were hopeful that that would be a little bit more fruitful in terms of employment, and they were correct. That's how I got into music. And then in undergraduate, University of Maryland has a fantastic opera program. Their Performing Arts Center is one of the largest on the East Coast. If you ever get a chance to go see an opera at UMD, you really, really should. It's some great bang for your buck. And I remember I saw Don Giovanni, and in this production, the Donna Elvira had a gun. And I thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. Little did I understand, of course, that the baritone doesn't get to play Donna Elvira, but you know. That sort of put me down the trajectory of opera. And then I came to UH to do just that. And I was into opera for a time. But from there, some of my first main professional gigs were with outreach programs like touring opera performances. I've performed with Houston Grand Opera to Go, with Portland Opera to Go over in Oregon. And that sort of started to veer me back down the path of education. I wanted to try performance while I was still young and could, get into it. And after trying it a little bit, I realized that I wanted to do something that I felt had just a little more impact on the world. And it seemed like the world at the time really had more of a need for positive male role model teachers than for male opera singers.
So your undergraduate degree, as you said, is in music education. And when you came to the University of Houston for your master's degree, did you focus on vocal performance?
At first I did, and then I turned my degree into a double degree in performance and pedagogy, which is a focus on teaching private voice lessons.
Right.
I wanted to continue down that performance route, as I said.
So tell us about some of the opera roles that you have sung. Do you remember back in college as an undergraduate, some of your debuts?
Well, in undergraduate at Maryland, I'm not sure if this is still true, but when I was there, undergrads pretty much never sang roles. In fact, part of the appeal of the master's program there was that it guaranteed you roles, and as such, all the roles, 99% of the time, went to the grad students. Right. But I did some opera chorus there. I was in Così fan tutte, and that was enjoyable for me. But some of my first roles that I really recall, I think one of my first leading roles was Papageno, which is probably the role I've sung the most.
In the Magic Flute.
Yes, in the Magic Flute.
Right.
And it's a role that I really enjoyed. An opera director once said to me that you have to treat Papageno as comedy. I remember a voice teacher once said to me, every time I see that show, I'm so grateful when Papageno comes on stage because I've just been dying of boredom until that point. But I like.
I mean, that's a fantastic character, and so well imagined in the music.
Yeah, and I did some acting before I sang opera, and you can really get into the acting of that role in a lot of ways. And there are so many opportunities in that role to really steal the show and to be high energy. I'm a pretty high energy performer. Comedy is sort of my main gig on stage. And speaking of comedy, another role that I absolutely loved was playing Maximilian in Candide with Opera in the Heights. It was a really colorful Hunger Games inspired take on Candide, and I got to wear this ridiculous blue wig with pink lips, and I had the time of my life. I
saw that production.
Yeah, and it was just so just high energy all the time. And to me, that's the stuff that I like. Is again, go hard or go home. Another role that I've played that is not opera, but I really loved was Talbot in this play called Our Boys. The playwright is Byron, and it's this hilarious old British comedy about surrounding inheritance, and I played this sort of Doogie Howser take on this character that was a lot of fun. just really simpering and hates everything about his life. Let's see. And then one other show that I really, really enjoyed was I played the Prince in a production of The Goose Girl, conducted by my friend, composer Michael Oberhauser, but originally written by Passatieri. And it's fun because it's new music, well, newer music. It's not new anymore, but 20th century music. And I like music you can really bite into that's a little bit dissonant sometimes and not the easiest to learn, but it also had that same fairy tale comedy colorful aesthetic that I enjoy, because sometimes 20th century music gets a little too Wozzeck and a little bit too really dark for my liking. So those are just a few of my favorites.
What about the difference between singing operatic roles and singing in the chamber choir? How do you reconcile, if you can, those two aspects of voice?
Well, I think that with chamber choir, stylistically, you have to sing in a more contained manner. In opera, they always say, you have to sing to the back of the house, sweetie, sing out, Louise, right? But in chamber choir, it's sometimes we need that, but usually not the case. It's often more gossamer. It's a more subtle sound, but I enjoyed into those subtleties of expression in a way that opera singers sometimes cannot, actually. The dynamic range that an opera singer can sing in, although of course you can sing a pianissimi and things like that, an opera singer's piano is not going to be the same as a chamber choir singer's piano. And I think that's important. I also think chamber choir singers need to be a little more flexible in terms of style and genre. There are, of course, times as an opera singer where you will want to sound like a jazz singer, but not quite as often as an ensemble that's known to, at least once or twice a season do a pops concert.
Right.
And that's one thing that I like about chamber choir. Again, I like a wide span of musical styles, and that's, I think, maybe another reason why opera singing in the end wasn't for me, at least not as my main career path, because if we're being real here, of course there's opera in a lot of different styles, in many different styles, right? But if we're being real, your bread and butter as an opera singer is going to probably be the same handful of roles by the same handful of composers, right? I mean, as an example, I played Papageno at least triple the number of times that I played the other roles that I mentioned, and I'm not alone in that as a singer.
What about the performative aspect? Obviously, with opera, the best opera singers are also, they don't just have great voices, they're great actors. Do you find that there is that performative aspect for you as part of the chamber choir?
Yes, I do. I don't think it's the same to the same degree. I can't be on stage doing all the crazy mumbo jumbo I did as Maximilian, for example, where it's all body humor. But I think that the most successful choirs are a bit theatrical and are facially expressive and welcoming. I think people overlook that much of the time because American singers sometimes get really myopic in their focus on aural perfection to, I feel, the detriment of other parts of the art form. But for example, I mean, in the pops concert we last had, that was, I want to say it was 1950s, bop music. We were moving and grooving on that stage. I was out of breath after many of those numbers. And that's the way it should be, I think, for that kind of music. When I did that show I mentioned earlier, Our Boys, the director said to us that in a comedy, if you are not out of breath every time you leave the stage, you're not giving enough. And while of course you don't want to be out of breath every time you leave stage as a singer, because it probably means singing is suffering, I think that there's something to be said, to be taken from that sentiment. one of my favorite kinds of choirs to watch are Renaissance choirs and madrigals, because they're constantly just moving with the music. And you get a sense that these people aren't just, 25 statues in their own isolated dimensions on stage that never see each other. And that's something that I like about chamber choir too. And being part of an ensemble like this, where for the most part, it's the same members each season, we develop bonds, and we develop a comfort level with being that way together on stage that not every ensemble can boast.
The singers often say, that their body is their instrument, and it's not just here, is what you seem to be saying. It's the whole body. Well, let's talk about what you like to do when you are not singing. What do you listen to music-wise?
I listen to a variety of things. Probably some of my go-to genres are, I love 70s and 80s funk and R&B. One of my big divas that I stand night and day is Chaka Khan. And not just 80s Chaka Khan, who is great, but like Chaka Khan and Rufus Chaka Khan. Or Prince, or I love a band called Shalimar, which is this 1980s R&B band with lots of great tunes and bops. My friends have been getting me into K-pop recently. I wouldn't say I'm the biggest K-pop fan, just because I can't sit here and rattle off more than, 2 K-pop bands off the top of my head. But I've enjoyed what I've heard. I like the energy of that music, but I've been trying also to listen more to traditional Iranian music, and also Iranian music around the Persian Revolution, which is like such a crazy, interesting time for the culture, because you had these competing cultural forces of the westernization that the Shah was trying to implement with traditional Iranian music, with Iranian instruments. And so you get artists like Gugush and Hayadeh, who are these interesting fusions of like music from all different parts of the world, including Latin music, including Western, music, jazz music, with Iranian music. So that's something I've been listening to more of lately. I'm a big fan of early Alicia Keys. I bought her first album and I was obsessed with her songwriting prowess. I love lots of classic rock, like I said earlier. My mother played the Bee Gees more than you could believe. It was her vacuuming soundtrack. It was her dishes soundtrack. And I love the Bee Gees. I love the disco era in general. It's great music. I'm trying to think of what other music I listen to. I listen to a lot of video game music. Not gonna lie, lately that's really been my bread and butter. I enjoy how cinematic it is, and the way that it tells stories orally. It's something that I like about classical music too. Some of the first classical music I ever loved was the Nutcracker. My parents bought me a cassette of Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker. It was just the Nutcracker suite. It wasn't even the whole, shebang. But I demanded, I think I was 6 or 7. I demanded every time we were in the car that we listened to it for 6 months. And
that was the first classical music that I ever listened to, was selections from Swan Lake, actually.
Yeah. And the funny part is, today, I'm not even the biggest Tchaikovsky fan. I mean, I like it, but it's not my first composer I'll listen to. My favorite composer is definitely Debussy, which is really not the same as Tchaikovsky at all. But I listen to Debussy too. So, yeah.
A little bird has also told me that you are, not only do you love listening to video game music, but you are a gamer yourself.
Oh yeah, I'm a huge fan of lots of single player games, actually. I'm an only child, so most only children will tell you that when you're an only child, you have to get really good at spending time by yourself. And I play lots of Japanese role-playing games. I'm a huge Final Fantasy nerd. Lately I'm into Fire Emblem, which are these tactical strategy games that are war-themed. But those RPGs are really my main gig.
You also like Dungeons and Dragons?
I sure do. It's a relatively new obsession for me. I've only been playing the last couple of years, but I love Dungeons and Dragons. One thing when I was a kid that baffled my parents that I would do was I would just pace around the house making up stories in my head.
Mm-hmm.
I would do this for hours. And I think that's something that I like about music is that it opens you up to be free to imagine your own worlds. Especially instrumental music, but I think vocal music, that's true too. And that's something that I like about D&D too, is that you can really imagine anything you want. It's not limited the way that video games are limited or that other media is limited. Its only limit is the human imagination.
Yeah.
I really love creating characters. I love experimenting with what parts of myself I can put into a character and while still not making it seem just like me.
Right.
You know, I think it's an interesting way to, and a safe way to explore your own psychology and also to see the psychologies of other people.
Obviously, you have a strong commitment to musical education and outreach. And one of the organizations that I know you work with, you mentioned earlier, is called Opera on Tap. What is that?
Opera on Tap is an international organization and network of opera singers that was founded originally in 2005 in New York City. But since then, it's sprawled out to the whole world, really. It started just in the US, but it's even got locations in Germany and other European countries all around. And we founded the Houston chapter in 2018. So we're currently smack dab in the middle of our third season. But what Opera on Tap does fundamentally, the easiest way to describe it is we sing arias in bars. It's more than that, of course. We've also, I mean, Opera on Tap Houston has sung for the Tomball German Festival. We've sung in other places that aren't bars. We've sung in restaurants as well. But mainly, Opera on Tap was designed as a means of conducting outreach for classical music, but to adults. I've also sung in children's operas, and that's great. But if we're sitting here and being quite honest with ourselves, the main audience, the target demographic for most opera houses is adults. And of course, I want children to go and enjoy the opera too, of course. But you don't want your child to go and watch Don Giovanni, you know? Not really a kid-friendly opera. And so it's designed to make opera seem less stuffy, less like something where you're going to go and be judged if you don't wear the right thing or applaud at the right moment. I remember, it's funny, I started with Opera on Tap on a children's opera gig, on an outreach touring gig in Portland, Oregon. I sang with the Portland Opera on Tap there, first as a means of earning myself a little extra spending money while I was in town. But I remember they tell you to create a little blurb introducing yourself and each piece. And I remember at first, my intro blurbs were almost apologetic. I would be saying things like, listen, I know you just came here for a bar and a beer, and I know you didn't come here for opera, but things like that. Or things like, please feel free to continue your conversations. I don't want to intrude. And I expected that would be what would happen. But actually, in most cases, the opposite happened. The room would start to go quiet. People would, I mean, not everybody, but most people would stop talking, would just walk over and stare at you performing. And it was an amazing feeling. And it really puts truth to the lie that, you know, opera is a dying art form. It does not have to be a dying art form. I think the role that Opera on Tap can fill, that is a role people often overlook the importance of, is being something of a connector organization. Because we live in Houston, which has a fantastic opera scene already, right? We have HGO, we have Opera in the Heights, we have so much more that I'm not even mentioning in that. And don't get me wrong, Opera on Tap Houston, we definitely want to stage our own shows and operas, but really, I think what we have that other companies don't is a means of bridging the gap and sort of getting people in there and just into the art form and interested. And that's something that happens at our show.
What about the reactions that you have experienced from the audience as part of the chamber choir?
Oh, the audience afterwards is usually so complimentary and so lovely to us. One of my favorite feelings is after the villa performance, when you have to walk back out to the front through the audience and you just pass person after person saying, that was so magical, that was so wonderful, thank you so much. And I think that those responses really show us how important the arts are.
Rameen Chaharbaghi is a bass in the Houston Chamber Choir. Rameen, thank you very much. It's been wonderful to talk to you, and congratulations on the Grammy, and all good wishes for the rest of the pandemic, and hopefully the choir will be back in front of a live audience in the not too distant future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, St. John. You have a good day.
And thank you to everybody who supports the Houston Chamber Choir as a sponsor, as a patron, as an audience member. We really do appreciate it, and we couldn't do what we do without you. This is Behind the Music. I'm St. John Flynn. Join us again next time.
The Houston Chamber Choirs with One Accord is your one-stop shop for choral joy. If you enjoyed this podcast, help us to continue our mission to grow the esteem and appreciation of choral music by sharing, reviewing, and subscribing to our content. As a 501c3 nonprofit, support from listeners like you allows us to continue making new and exciting programming. For more information about us and how you can support our work, please visit HoustonChamberChoir.org/give.